Go ahead and get started. My name is Loftus Mercer. This is Darren Nattinger. Many of you may have met us virtually on various forums in Lava and NI.com. Today, we're going to present a new feature of LabVIEW 2015 that Darren and I jointly developed. I'm working on the text side and working on the graphics side. It's called Augmenting the Right-Click Menus in LabVIEW 2015. Now, some of you may recall a right-click framework from several years ago that allowed you to modify the LabVIEW editing environment to add your own menu items for doing different types of edits. That was produced by alliance partners and the customer groups. It stopped working after LabVIEW 2012 because something changed inside the code, and the hack that they were using to drive that through stopped working. Not intended, but that's what happens when you take advantage of hacks that weren't supposed to be there. This time, we took the time to build a proper system into LabVIEW as an actual first-class supported feature. And we're now giving you guys the ability to amend the editor environment. So, this presentation, in case I go too fast or you miss something, and all the demo files are available at ni.com/lbmenus. And we'll talk more about what's exciting at that website as we go on. So, we're going to go through this agenda here. Existing ways to augment the editor. We'll fill in a few of you who may not have, be fully aware of just how flexible the LabVIEW editor has been made over the last few years. Introduction to our plugin system for the menus. How you build one of them. An inventory of the ones that are currently shipping with LabVIEW 2015, which will make good example programs for you to work from. Tools that we use for developing the plugins. Some explanation of why we built them the way we did. And some caveats and pro tips for handling some of those more interesting scripting situations. So, when we talk about existing ways to extend the LabVIEW editor, we've created many systems over the years. You've got the pull-down menus. Those are the bar across the top, File, Edit, View, etc., that drop down. Well, you can go into 3 of those menus and add to them. How do you add to the Tools menu? Does everyone know? Well, there's a directory on disk that's named Project, which is perfectly symmetric. You put a VI in the project directory, its VI title will automatically get added to the Tools menu. And the reason it's named Project on Disk is because that used to be called the Project menu back when it was on the Macintosh. And then everybody changed to Tools, and we didn't want to break compatibility by renaming the directory. So you put a VI in the Project directory, its title automatically gets picked up, and then when you select it, that VI gets executed and run. It's a very easy way to extend it. For the help drop-down menu, there's a help directory. That one hasn't changed name. For the file directory,
Wizard.
Right.
I'm serious.
Yeah, I believe you. Okay, so a directory named Wizard. I've never had reason to extend that one myself. Darren knows some of these G tricks. The quick drop keyboard shortcuts. Any of you are familiar with quick drop? You launch LabVIEW, you hit Control Space. If you do it too fast, you have to wait a moment for it to finish loading. Okay, now you get your list of the palettes, you can type in. But not only can you just type in order to drop stuff, you can hit various keyboard shortcuts, like select some code on your diagram, Control Space, Control R to do a remove and rewire. You can write your own keyboard shortcuts, and we've talked about in previous sessions and in the online help how to do that. It's all written in G code. You can go in and fill those in. There's project providers. Many of you are alliance partners. Many of you are major systems integrators. If you have a reason to actually modify the project environment and can plug in some of these larger tools that you may have been downloading from the Tools Network, there are ways to hook all of the iconography and the menu systems and the editor support in the project tree. Now, that's an API that is sufficiently complicated and has to be done in concert with everybody else who's plugging into the project environment, that we don't just open it up to the world. But if you've got tools and such that need to play in that environment, contact the LabVIEW Tools team and put yourself on the list of people to get help with that. There's a few other minor things here and there. You can plug in your own icon editor, this sort of thing. We try as much as possible to give you custom probes, whatnot, all these little places to use G to modify the LabVIEW environment. But we've never really been able to do that with the right-click menus, at least not in a way that has worked in the last few years. So, to open up the doors to really drive some more power through the editor, Darren and I said, what could we do that would maximize his productivity? That's really been my primary job for the last 3 years, is making him able to do more. I sit there and I go, where can I put some more G code into this C++ code? It's a new feature of LabVIEW 2015, right? G code augments the menus. You can modify the edit time, panel, and diagram menus. So while your VIs are idle, right-click on the panel, right-click on the diagram. You can modify the runtime diagram. So while your VIs are running, you can do things on the block diagram for adding magical probes or things along those lines. It does not allow you to modify the runtime panel right-click menus. Why? Because these are things that plug into the editor. They are not going to be built into your built-in EXEs and your runtime distributions and all of that. If you want to modify the runtime menus that are part of your actual running applications, those are features you already have. You use the event structure, you use the menu primitives, this sort of thing. So that needs to be a part of your actual formalized code. These are plugins meant for the editor environment and the editor and debug environments only. What do we mean by augmenting? Because a lot of people were like, why didn't you just call it adding? Marketing wanted us to lose this augmenting term. We had to explain. It's way beyond just inserting new menus. We can add new menu entries, sure. Including whole new pull right sections, if that's what you decide to do. We can remove and replace existing menu entries. If you've never liked the change to indicator, because you just never use that, you can remove change to indicator. I accidentally did that during one of my tests, and I forgot I had that plugin installed, and I couldn't figure out where my change to indicator went, which is why that one's in my head. You can also manipulate the entries. Enable, disable, check, uncheck. One of my favorite plugins that we've written is actually a plug out. It takes the entire breakpoints pull right menu and moves it up to the top level, because I never liked the decision to put all of those menu items in a pull right. So I wanted them at the top level, so I wrote that one. That one doesn't ship with LabVIEW. You have to go download it. All right. So building a plugin. Darren, you're the G programmer. Why don't you show them how to do that?
All right, so we're going to build a plugin today for the right-click menu. It's going to be a little more interesting than the Fonzie one you guys saw this morning. This one's actually going to do something useful other than encourage me to not be nervous on stage. So there are going to be 3 parts of your typical right-click plugin. There's going to be the affected items type def, which is how you define which things in your VI your right-click will act on. There's the builder VI, which is what defines what actual text items you see in the menus. Then there's the execute VI, which is basically, okay, someone has picked my right-click plugin entry in the menu. Let me go ahead and run some scripting code. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down here and write a plugin. And what else is over here? I reached for the mouse.
Yeah, I was about to remind you.
All right, so the plugin we're going to write today is a spell checker plugin. All right. So the first thing we need to do is run the tool that creates a new plugin for us. And that tool is in the LabVIEW folder. Now, all the paths that I'm going to in these, don't worry about writing these down. These are all in the slides that you guys can download. But in the resource folder, I can go grab the utility that will create me a new plugin. So we're going to call this plugin spell check. And when I run the creator, it's going to create those 3 things I talked about before. The affected items type def, the builder VI, and the execute VI. So the first thing I'm going to do, by the way, can everybody in the back hear me okay? Just want to make sure I'm using this table mic, and so I don't know if it's amplifying my voice appropriately. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is define what kind of things can this right-click menu appear on. And for the cases of this demo, I'm going to say that I want a spell checker to appear when you right-click on a string control or a string indicator. That makes sense, right? So I'm going to change this class in the affected items to string. And it just takes just a minute to navigate the interface. All right, so now this is a string array. Here, let me just go ahead and name it so that it's easy to recognize. All right, so I have basically said I want this plugin to operate on strings. That's all I need to do for that. If I wanted to operate on other stuff, like numerics, I would add more arrays to this type def and name them whatever classes I decided. But here, we're just going to work on strings.
So just to be clear, you can put as many arrays into that cluster as you need for each of the different types.
Exactly. So now I'm looking at the Builder VI. So this is the VI that's going to generate the actual text that you see in the menu. Now there are many things that you can do in the Builder VI. Like Stephen talked about before, we're augmenting the menus. You can see here, apologies to those in the back of the room, but I have an input to this plugin called NIWeek. This is a reference to the actual menu that's being generated right now. So if there's something in the menu that, for whatever reason, isn't compatible with my spell checker, like I don't want people to see my spell checker and that menu item, I can actually remove it out of the list right now. Let's say this was a VI where the string control was locked or grouped, and I didn't want the spell checker to be able to modify that for whatever reason. I could disable my spell check item in the menu as well. These are things that I can use with the NIWeek input, and with this cluster here that defines all the information about the menu item. So I can say what its name is, I can say where the execute VI is, I can say where it appears in the menu. All these things are customizable in your Builder VI. For the purposes of our demo, I'm really not going to do anything special in here. By default, a menu item is going to be created matching the name of the plugin. I named my plugin Spell Check. That's a good name. So I'm not going to change anything about the Builder VI. Everything that's here right now is good for my demo. Now we're going to get into the Execute VI. So this is the VI where once somebody actually picks your menu item out of the list, so this is the point where they have right-clicked on a string, seen the spell check item in the list, and clicked on it. At that point, this code right here is going to run. And so let me clear out some of these comments here so I have some room. And I'm going to write some code in here that does a spell check on each one of those strings that are in the selection. So I did cheat a little bit. Whoops, what's fun to do? All right, so I did cheat a little bit, and I went ahead and wrote a VI already that does some of the logic for a spell checker. Let me grab that VI real quick.
Let's be clear, he didn't exactly cheat, he stole it out of his own VI analyzer.
Right, that's true. So all of these demos I'm showing right now are part of the downloads on the link that Stephen gave at the beginning, including the spell checker test, or the spell checker right-click menu option. But in order for this to work, you do have to have the VI analyzer installed. So keep that in mind. But anyway, just to really quickly show you guys what's going on in this VI, this is a VI that's pulling the VI analyzer spell check dictionary off of disk, checking every word in a string that's passed in, and then turning any word that it finds that isn't in the dictionary, turning it the color red. That's what this code is doing. So this was my cheating a little bit. I wrote this VI before the demo. So we've got this VI in here. We're going to have it check every single string that was in the right click. Because if you selected multiple strings or multiple objects on your front panel and right click, references to all of them are going to come back into the Builder VI. So the plugins that Stephen and I are talking about support multi-select as well. So what I'm going to do is, if any of the strings have a spell check or a spelling error in them, I'm going to say that I do not want to fail the transaction. So the way that we have the plugins working, if your plugin code encounters an error, or if your plugin code detects that it didn't make any changes, you can tell LabVIEW, I want to pretend like they didn't even pick this right-click option. So for example, if they right-clicked on a string and I didn't find any misspellings in it, I don't want to add a spell check entry to their undo stack, right? That doesn't make any sense because I didn't actually change any spellings. So this is how you can have a plugin say, all right, I've done my scripting code, but I didn't change anything, or an error might have occurred. Let me go ahead and fail this transaction and pretend like it never happened.
How many of you have done transactions in scripting? A few of you. Basically, behind the scenes, I go ahead and start a transaction. So when your code is running, there's already one in play. If you tell me to cancel it, then we'll fail it out, and the editor will roll back all of those changes.
Right, so I'm actually done with my plugin now. I wrote the affected items type def to say I want to work on strings. I wrote the Builder VI to put the menu item in the menu, and I wrote the Execute VI to do the scripting. I'm actually done. There's only one more thing I need to do. I could restart LabVIEW right now to refresh the menu system, but we actually provided a utility VI for you guys so that you don't have to restart LabVIEW. Again, going into the LabVIEW folder, and all of these paths are given in the slides. We can open this VI that will refresh the menus. So I'm just going to run this VI real quick. Now the menus have been refreshed. Now let's open a VI that has some spelling mistakes in it.
It took a while to find a VI that had mistakes on it. He just doesn't make those.
All right, so here we have several string controls. They have some spelling mistakes in them, don't they? So I'm going to right-click on one of those strings and there's this new spell check menu item in the list. That wasn't there before. That doesn't ship with LabVIEW. That was provided by the VIs that I just wrote. So I'm going to click on that, and we're going to see, apologies for colorblind individuals, but we found all of the misspelled words in that string and set them to red. I can do an undo and a redo. So this is just like built-in right-click options in the editor, and multi-select also works. So if I select all of these guys, spell check is also in the list, and if I choose it, then it's going to go through and find all of the misspellings and all of the words. Yes, question, John?
Spell check labels of the objects as well as content.
The question was, does it spell check the labels? The plugin that I just threw together in 45 seconds does not check the labels, but we could make that change. Any other questions? Yes?
For multiple selections, if you grab something that wasn't string controlled, will the option show up in the right place menu?
Good question. So if I had a numeric on this front panel, and I included that in my selection, and Steven wants me to do it just to be fancy. Here, actually, let me get rid of it so we can see that it still works. All right, so now we've got a numeric, and if I include it in the selection, we'll see that the spell check still shows up. In the actual plugin code itself, remember the affected items array that I defined was only the string type. So only the strings are going to come back in there. But since Steven is so brilliant, one of the things in the another input to your plugin is an array of other objects that were in the selection. So if your plugin needs to know that that numeric was also in the selection, we'll also give you that information as well.
And that way you can make a decision about, is yours one that works on anytime one of these objects is in there, or only when exclusively those objects are in there. And you can check for how many there are, because there are some menu items that don't make sense unless there is only one currently being selected, this sort of thing.
Right. Are there any other questions about the, yes?
Strings, arrays, and clusters?
Strings and arrays. Oh, like if those guys were in a cluster?
Right.
Yes, that would work.
And in fact, I believe you would get the cluster back in the affected items array because it was part of your right-click hierarchy, but it wasn't a string that was defined for this
If you
plugin.
think about it, the way that this gets built up, anytime you right-click on anything in LabVIEW, you see options there, and you guys are intuitively aware of this. If you right-click on a terminal, you'll see options in there that are for the terminal, you'll see options in there that are for the node, and in some cases you'll see options in there that are for the diagram on which that node sits. So all of the objects that get visited in the course of building up that original menu, those are then checked to see, are any of these your affected items? If any of them are, we run your plugin.
Question.
So the fact that they're red, that's an indication to us to go and select them and spell it.
Sure. The way I wrote the plugin, yes, that's how it works.
So if I use the generic control reference, will it show up on all the
Yes. If you set your type as root generic reference, then anything you right-click. In fact, there's one shipping, or not shipping, but one available plugin that does exactly that. That appears on everything. There's a particular tool we'll talk about here in a little bit that falls in that category.
The horizontal lines above and below spell check, were those put in from the code, or was that something automatic?
So the question was, the little dividers here,
Yeah.
were those put in by the plugin or were they put in just automatically? Go ahead.
If you don't give us any directive, by default, we will create a whole section right here before properties, and everything, all of the plugins will be in that section, and we'll go ahead and properly put it in. If you specify it to go anywhere else, we don't auto-add them.
Go for it.
So if I wanted to change and say not red, I wanted them to be purple. Will the change to your execute VI be immediate, or do I have to
Good question. So remember how I ran that refresh menus VI so that it would refresh the menu system and I wouldn't have to restart LabVIEW? If you make any changes to your builder VI or your affected items type def, so basically changes that would cause what objects the right click shows up on or what the text of it is or where it's positioned, those types of changes require refreshing the menus. Changes to the execute VI do not require refreshing the menu. So now if I like the way it looks in the menu but I need to tweak my scripting code, you don't have to refresh the menus, just go tweak your scripting code. Question?
Debugging your reference menu.
You want to take this one?
Sure. Debugging the builder VI is kind of tricky. We'll show you some things to do in a moment. You cannot turn on debugging in the VI that is part of the builder. If you try to turn it on, LabVIEW will simply ignore your plugin. That's because we can't, while we're in the middle of building a right-click menu, we can't stop and do execution highlighting breakpoints or anything else because we're trying to respond to your right-click already. However, you can turn on all of the debugging features for your execute VI. So It's usually pretty easy to put your item in the right place in the menu, so that's not usually a big hurdle. And then you've got the full debugging power that you want and you don't. For those of you who even know what this is, you don't even have to worry about root loop issues for the execute VI. It's all handled at top level, so you're free and clear of that issue.
And if you don't know what root loop issues are, count yourself lucky.
I handled it. It's gone.
All right, any other questions before we move on? Yes?
Does this work on constants in the block diagram?
This can work on anything in a front panel or a block diagram. This plugin I wrote only works on strings. I could have added another array into my affected items type def to have it work on string constants as well. I didn't. I guess if I had an extra minute, I probably could have.
Do you have to work on arrays then?
Yeah. So it'd be an array of ref num of type array control. So yeah, you never are operating on an array in that sense. It's always a reference to the object that you're clicking on, or objects.
Can you make it like if you right click on a wire?
Any object that you can click on the panel or diagram.
Yes. Stephen and I have added right-click menus to many, many things.
The only thing you can't actually do is if you try to right-click an empty space on the diagram, that gives you the palette, and you can't get into that.
Yep.
But the panel, you can do it on the panel, you can do it on free labels, you can do it on any of them.
So I had a drop plugin I already created that did like a cleanup or something in my diagram, and I was just going to have something to think. How would I turn that into a right-click menu just to have it work on something?
Right, so we actually took a couple of quick drop I'm sorry, the question was, we have a quick drop plugin that does some cool thing. How can we make it a right-click menu option that does some cool thing? We actually did that with a couple of the quick drop plugins. If you guys noticed in the keynote, I went kind of fast, but I did highlight some code and right-click and choose remove and wire. So we took that plugin and made it a right-click option. We also took the wire all terminals one, where you can press Control Space, Control D, and get the controls and indicators to all show up. We made that into a right-click plugin as well. What we ended up doing was taking the scripting guts of the quick drop plugin, turning it into a shared VI, and actually having both quick drop and the right-click plugin framework all both.
So we added the feature to be able to do the augmenting of the menus. And as I said, my job is to free him up to actually start working. And from there, these are the ones that are actually shipping with LabVIEW. Both Darren and I, we basically took turns. He'd write a plugin, I would buddy it, check it out. Then I'd write one, he'd buddy it, check it out. We'd pass it back and forth. These are the ones they actually let us ship. Because those are the ones that we got done early enough that they were comfortable with us putting it in. But we kept writing long after they said 2015 is done. But if you go into 2015, you'll be able to see these 8. So we can do right-click on a list box and say clear items and wipe out all the content.
Why don't I do the demo while you...
Ooh, there's a novel concept. Do you have a list box?
I do.
All right, so list box, delete all rows, which previously you had to do delete. That takes a while. Works on multi-column, works on all of that. The next one's the change to array and element.
Stephen wrote this one. Well, I know it's a fan favorite, so I'm going to give you some credit.
So there you go. This allows you to pop up on these things. It also works on constants on the diagram for just convert these things over so that you can do the back and forth. Because a lot of people say that that's one that they wanted very frequently.
By the way, all 7 of these were on the idea exchange and had relatively high kudos.
Another reason we got to put them in. All right, so transpose. You've got your matrix laid out there, and in the data operations, you can now get it transposed, flip it around.
Try to keep in mind while I'm showing all of these, this is all LabVIEW G code that you guys could write.
Yeah, if you want to transpose your matrices differently, you can do that. And also works on that. Darren wrote that one.
Okay.
See, I wait until after it succeeds to get it. All right, Explorer sub-VI. This one neither of us wrote. Let's see if it works. There you go. So right-clicking on a sub-VI, it just opens it up to the Windows Explorer, highlights the item. Our good friend Bob wrote that one.
Yep.
What's next? Oh yeah, his favorite right-click plugin, or thing. Here you go. There's a remove and rewire.
If you guys like to use Quick Drop to do this, continue to do so.
Yeah, we didn't delete the Quick Drop shortcut. It's still there. Control Space Control R.
Sure.
All right. Oh yeah.
This is a great one. I showed this one in the keynote. So size to widest element. It goes through all the elements in the array constant and figures out which one is the biggest and makes the array that big. Steven wrote that one. Why am I even here, Steven?
Wait for it.
All right, so this is the quick drop one. Control Space Control D, create. And now see, this is an example of a plugin that I stuck into an existing submenu. And I also, oh look, competent keynote speaker, that was the font. And notice that divider there. So I was able to go into a pull right, add a divider, and add my new plugins under that divider. So those are the ones that ship with LabVIEW 23.
And each one has got a few things that we did. We tried to actually find ones that we could get in there very quickly that would show interesting cases or places where we had to worry about stuff. Like the clear listbox one operates on two types, listbox and multi-column listbox, so it's one of those that shows two arrays and it's set up and this sort of thing. When you are writing your own plugins, you may very well want to look at ours as an example starting point. Back to it there. All right. So, tools for developing plugins. First of all, there's the LabVIEW documentation. We ship with good documentation, or at least I like to think so. I've had actually various customers and everybody read through it, so I was like, does this actually make sense? Yeah. They said they could actually build one. That was good. It's always reassuring when you get to the end of a project and you're like, can I actually explain this to anyone? You saw the plugin creator tool that Darren ran at the beginning. It's a little wizard that just scripts up the initial pieces that you need, goes ahead and creates the LLV that everybody gets saved into. You saw the refresh menus VI. That VI just has a single invoke node on its block diagram. It's not password protected. And it's the same refresh menus function that you've seen, that you guys have used if you've ever had to write a VIPM plugin that's going to modify the menus or something and just says, hey LabVIEW, reload all of your menu cache. And the plugins get scanned as a part of that. Oh, I guess we should mention that. All of the G plugins that we wrote, none of them have passwords set. So let's talk about the lookup all entries plugin. If we flip back over to LabVIEW, yeah, go ahead. He's faster. That too.
All right, so we had a really cool right-click plugin that ships with LabVIEW but isn't enabled by default. That allows you, that basically helps you debug whenever you're writing your own plugins. And I don't have it installed right now, so I'll go ahead and install it. So if we go into resource, again, all of this stuff is in resource plugins pop-up menus. So there is a plugin called Lookup All Shortcut Menu Tags and Types. And if I go put this in my plugins folder, and then I go refresh my menus again, I don't think I left it again.
Yeah, I guess we did.
So if I go refresh my menus again, now whenever I right-click on something, there's this new menu option, Look Up All Shortcut Menu Tags and Types. The only purpose of this menu option is to help you when you're writing pop-up plugins. And when you pick that, you basically get something that gives you the tags of every single menu item in the thing you just right-clicked, and the names of all of the objects that came back, or the classes of all the objects that came back, so you'll know, oh, this is an array class, or this is a listbox class, or whatever, so you can know those class names.
This also just happens to be a useful tool when you decide to write some scripting code and you have no idea what type of object that is. Go install this and then you can find that out real quick. I learned that early on when I was doing the development.
The thing I found it most useful for is whenever you want to take an item, a menu item for your plugin and put it into an existing menu. This is how you find out the name of that existing menu that you want to stick your plugin into.
It's organized pretty straightforwardly. The top level menu is the first items, and then it goes in full right order, and it's a breadth first search down through the tree.
And you'll notice that plugins that we've written show up in the list as well, so you can get the tag names of those guys as well.
Right. So here's the way that this works. First, we build the pop-up menus for all of the built-in items in LabVIEW. They're all completely built. Then we run the plugins in alphabetical order. So whatever file name you give it, that's the order they're going to run in. Some of you are going to write plugins that may interoperate with each other, or where one may be installed and a separate one, and you want to say, oh, put me after that other menu. You'll be able to find your existing, the ones that run ahead of you will already be in that menu. I did realize a little too late that lookup, all tags and types, probably should have been named with a ZZZ in it, so they would run after everything else had been built, and that didn't cross my mind. So if you have a plugin that's named something after L, you may want to rename this little debug tool.
And the names, as I found out recently, are case sensitive as well. So if you have a plugin with change to with a capital T and a plugin with change to with a lowercase t, then the order of them may not be what you expect when the words after change to are.
And the reason they're case sensitive is so that you write a plugin and it works on Windows. It also works on Linux, where the file systems are case sensitive. So there's a madness to the method. All right. We've added some new properties and methods. I'll describe those in detail on the next slide. We've got some utility sub-VIs that are also fun to use. And as I said, that whole directory of the existing shipping plugins, those can be useful for you to help as a guide. All right, those of you who do scripting have noticed over the years that some of our scripting API is a little bit incomplete. And as we started trying to write these plugins, I felt compelled to go fill in some parts of it that were not previously there. So there's a new value property, value parentheses undo. Currently, if you call the value property, it does not get recorded by a transaction. So of all the edits you make, when you hit Control-Z, everything gets undone except settings of the value property. If you call value undo, it gets recorded as part of the transaction. Similarly, default value currently is not transacted, but the new property default value undo is transacted.
Sorry, I don't understand what that means or why I should or shouldn't be done.
So when you write a piece of scripting code and you say begin transaction, and then you do move, change color, change the indicator, change data type, finish transaction. From the user's point of view, all of that happens, and they hit Control-Z, and all of that gets rolled back. But if one of those operations that you did was set value of a control or an indicator, nothing happens. It doesn't get undone. Same with default value. So these two new properties allow the value and the default value to be included. We needed that in order for the transpose matrix to work.
Do you actually have to say value undo?
Yeah, just like you have value signaling, which fires the event as a separate property, this is another one that is value undo.
But it doesn't mean to undo the value. It means to put the value in there, but allow it to be undone.
Yes. Value undoable. Undo is actually the short name, so it didn't take up more space on the diagram. It's there.
Right, I got it.
All right. Let's see. What else we got? Move selection to front, to back, forward, backward. So all of the Z-plane edits are now available. Disconnect terminal from a wire without removing the loose end. So sometimes you want to delete a terminal and you got that loose, the little bit of loose end. You expect to be able to grab the wire, but if it's short enough, LabVIEW automatically removes it for you. This function will remove the terminal and leave even a little snippet, which often makes your scripting code a lot easier to write because you don't have to worry about the case where it just evaporated out from under you.
Who added that method, Steve?
I actually don't know.
I believe Kay added that method.
Okay. It appeared one day after I was complaining about its absence, and I never went and checked the logs. Okay.
I believe the father of LabVIEW found need to add that method in LabVIEW.
All right. Yeah, he wrote a number of these plugins. There's a story there. Anyway. Jeff doesn't like writing C++ code anymore. He really, it's anathema. When this came in, he's like, oh, I'm going to town. Replace with case selector. The function that allows you to pick a terminal and say, make this the case selector, that's now available through scripting. These two are fun. A lot of you have asked for these variations on these over the years, and I finally got around to actually putting them in. Called on a VI, this will give you all of the dependencies that are missing, and this will give you all of the dependencies that are found. And that means libraries, VIs, templates, blah, all of it. You can get those from that, and there's another one that actually didn't make this list that is on a sub-VI. If the sub-VI is missing, the actual sub-VI to be invoked is missing, you can now get the path from the sub-VI node. So you can write tools that allow you to find missing sub-VIs. Utility VIs. As we said, we visited a couple times during his demos. There's this whole support directory. We already talked about the this template. You copy it in. Now it's installed and available. There's a number of functions that you'll see that you can call to be used. Check remaining items for control terminals. Whenever you right-click on a control, you get a control. When you right-click on an FP terminal, on a panel terminal on the block diagram, the control will also show up in the list of right-clicked menu items. Because, for example, if you right-click on a numeric, you get all of the change representation options. Those are added by the control. What that means is it's very hard sometimes to tell, did you right-click on the panel or on the block diagram? And for a control plugin, there's some of them that you want to work when it's on the diagram, and there's some of them you only want it to work when you can actually see the front panel. So this function allows you to scan through the remaining items list, and if it finds any terminals, you know it was a click on the diagram. Filter for the contained constants only. When you right-click on a string inside an array, inside a cluster, inside an array, this will get you the one that is only the innermost one, because all of those will show up in the list. And sometimes you want to be able to figure out which one it is that's the deep one, that's the one that actually clicked on. Similarly, filter for contained controls, same thing on the front panel. Refresh menus, again, if you write a VI package manager that's going to install some of these tools, you may want to call that in your post build. All right. So we mentioned ni.com/lb menus at the start of this, and was where you can find this presentation. But you can also find, as of, well, I checked this morning, and somebody may have uploaded more because it's a community site, 26 different plugins that you may want to choose to install.
We needed to get at least 24 for me to be able to say dozens on the keynote stage.
Yeah, he and I were buddying code right up until the end there. So you've got additional resources for developing the plugins. There's discussion support and place to download. There's also, you can give ratings to the plugins. When you know, any post in the forums, you can mark number of stars for a download. There's a little bit of a star guide that I added that says, you know, please use this to rank them. If you think that something is just good and you really like it, give it 4 stars. If you think it's so good that it should ship with LabVIEW, give it 5. If you wouldn't use it yourself, but you don't mind if it ships with LabVIEW, give it 3. If it actively gets in your way and you don't want it to become a part of LabVIEW, even though other people might find it useful, give it a 2. If it's actually broken or not working or somehow is really egregious, give it a 1. But if you kind of use that guide, that'll give us some clue as to what we should be developing and going forward to try and, you know, maybe augment LabVIEW 2016, if there is a 2016. I never called this future functionality.
Are these limited to version folders, or is there a version independent folder?
Great question. I believe that comes up later in the slides.
It probably does. There's a little bit of a story there. There wasn't going to be. So, the decision behind the design. I keep getting people who've asked, aren't LLVs deprecated? The answer is no. They turn out to be one of the, well, in many cases, the fastest way to load a block of VIs off of disk. If you can actually, the LLVs aren't just like a packed zip file. They actually organize the resources of multiple VIs in ways that allow LabVIEW to very quickly pull them off of disk. So they're really nice. They operate like source code. You can save into them. You can load from them directly. And because they retain their block diagrams, you can directly manipulate them unlike PPLs, they were a really nice container for this particular project. And we were very concerned about speed and performance for loading these things. Because you don't want to get 20 plugins in and suddenly your right clicks take 3 seconds to respond. We want to maintain the same snappy, you right click and there's a pop-up menu. We've loaded these up with about 100 different plugins and no real change in the time. And a big part of that is because all of the plugins are saved as LLVs. And so when I'm going through and loading chunks out of them, they're already optimized for the load. It provides a single file for distribution. Most of these you want to be able to just slap a file in. You want all of the pieces that are necessary. You can pack it all nicely in an LLV. It's a good unit. If we were having a lot of separate files, that would require a step of building a VI package or something like that, which is nice if you're going to distribute many of these, but if you're just going to have one available for download, it seems like overkill.
Question?
The build CLO, we don't have that actually.
Correct. Yeah. The scripting tool will create that initial LLV and put all that together.
Right, when I wrote my spell checker and clicked run, it gave me the spell check LLD with the VIs already in.
The affected items input, that's that cluster of an array of ref nums, and you can put as many array of different types of ref nums in there as you want. This is you declaring which items your plugin is going to affect. And you can use this declaration. LabVIEW is doing a whole lot of, we try to minimize the number of times we scan that directory, and then I create a cache behind the scenes of this maps onto this subset of plugins, and so I don't have to redo that computation every time. By having you formalize that as part of your declaration. That's why you either have to restart LabVIEW or run refresh menus in order to update for changes that you do there. It's because I've already cached a lot of information out of those and already retained the build VIs in memory. There are two plugin directories. This is speaking to the question over here. The one is for the LabVIEW version specific plugins. That's under resources, plugins, pop-up menus, and then the two directories. And then over in the LabVIEW data directory, there's LabVIEW data, pop-up menus, and then the subdirectories for these things, which allows you for version agnostic. So if you put anything under the LabVIEW data, every version of LabVIEW from 2015 forward will try to load those plugins. If it finds one that isn't for it, like if you put a 2016 plugin in, 2015 will just say, well, I can't read it, go on. And that way, if you've got a whole bunch of plugins you've already installed that you really like, when you get to 2016, you don't have to reinstall them, because 2016 will already be finding them.
Is it maybe possible for a new feature that the plugin can also travel with the project? So that if I open the project on the customer PC, that I have the same plugin available?
So the question is can we make it so that the plugin would travel with the project? My answer to that would be you would do it the same way you would make all the VIs that would travel with the project travel with the project. And that is, you're going to create some sort of package for distribution. That's probably where I would point you to VI Package Manager, because at that point, you don't want to just hand your user, an email full of VIs with instructions of which directory to put stuff in. So instead, you would build a VI package that would properly install them. The reason I would hesitate to say we should ever package them directly with the project is that this affects your whole editor environment. So it would apply to whatever project you had open. So I don't think that's a road we necessarily want to go down. Is a environment which is tuned depending on which project you have open. We can certainly evaluate it. If you throw that up on the ID Exchange, the rest of the community can chime in and see if that would work. My initial instinct would be that that would be awkward, but on the other hand, there are times when you want to have a very specific design environment, so maybe there is some value there.
The solution I've seen some people do is the VI Package Manager approach, because there's lots of other things in the LabVIEW environment that are customizations that you might want to move over to another system, like quick drop plugins and tools menu pull downs and all that kind of stuff. And people will make a VI package that's basically my dev tools, and they can install that on the other machine, and it would then install all of these types of things into the right spots in the LabVIEW folder.
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing VI Package Manager was created for, and I would encourage you to look in that direction, at least for now.
If you install your plugins on a new copy, LabVIEW, and some of the dependencies of the plugins are missing.
So LabVIEW will check, it finds a broken VI, it will silently drop those out of the menus, it doesn't complain or anything. For LabVIEW 2016, I actually had some debug tools on my own that it was pointed out after the fact. I probably should have prioritized it a little bit more. I had a way of creating a log file of the which plugins got skipped and why. I didn't actually ship that, and I may go back and do that. So that people can recognize that if there is something wrong. Because right now, the menu items just aren't there. That's the only feedback you get, that something must be wrong with that plugin.
Got another question?
The VIs in the LLBs, are they in the same namespace as the VIs in your project?
No.
Can that cause a conflict?
They are, all of the VIs that are in the plugins are all together in the same namespace, but they are not in the same namespace as any of your project VIs. So there's not a risk of collision with whatever it is you're working on and designing. So, some caveats. The affected items filtering. You want to only include the most specific classes your plugin affects. Don't use gObject when you want to just get strings. Because that means we're going to run your builder VI on everything that you pop up on. And if you start doing that in lots of places, eventually you will bog down the response time of your right-click menus. Right-clicking the block diagram terminals will run the plugins that affect control ref nodes. So that's where we talked about the filtering VI. If you right-click on an FB terminal, you're going to get the controls to execute. So you may want to say, I want to back off on that. So that's where you need to check your items and verify that this really is the set that you want. Builder VI performance. You want to make sure your Builder VI is lightweight. This next line is a little bit of paranoia. Like I said, we've loaded the plugins with a fair number of plugins and not seen significant degradation. If by chance you get to a point where somewhere in some far-flung 2016 or something you find your system really is bogging down, you can go through and disconnect all the type defs. Those are one extra VI that you don't actually need. It's in there for your convenience in order to keep your execute and your builder VIs in sync. But if you want to disconnect your builder VI from it, I actually am only just looking at the connector pane of the builder VI itself. It doesn't have to be a type def. So if you disconnect the type def, that's one less VI that would have to be loaded as part of your builder. Minor thing, I don't expect to ever need it, but everyone who talked to me about this was really paranoid that we didn't want to have any performance impact, so any little thing I could do to get the performance better was included. Be careful when reading the data type property. So the question back here was, are we in the same namespace as the project? No. So your project VIs are over here in one application instance. The plugin VIs are running in a different application instance. All the data types are identical across both of those application instances except for one set of data types. And those would be your LabVIEW classes, because they're only defined on one side and not over here. So any work you want to do can create some problems. If you must read a data type, do it in the owning VI's application instance as best as you can. So call across, so load a VI into the user VI context, load it up over there, do your work, and then quit and then unload it. Or you can use the clever request deallocation primitive, which will basically, the problem is you've got your classes over here, but you're using data over here. And if you leave data on this side and this guy quits, LabVIEW will crash because suddenly you've got data objects over here that no longer have their definition. It's a known bug in LabVIEW. It's not one that we can really solve without, the only way we come up with to solve it causes a significant slowdown on the performance of all of LabVIEW. That's really unacceptable. And this is such an edge case that it doesn't come up that often. So I'm warning you about it here. There's some example shipping or downloadable plugins that use the request deallocation trick that fix the problem. If you run into it, basically ask a question on the forums. I'll explain how to untangle it. That's really what that one means. Some pro tips. So the builder VI is going to stay in memory after the first load. We don't unload it every time. Once we get it up, there's no point in reloading it on every right click. What that means is you can use the global VIs in the builder can be used to persist data between runs of your builder VI, and you can use, and they'll actually stick, and so you can do some cool things. One of the ones you can download is one I wrote called the wire drill. You go to sub VI A, you right click on a terminal, and you say start wire drill. You go to some deeper sub VI, 3 layers down your hierarchy, right click on a sync terminal, and you say end wire drill. And it modifies the connector pane and does the wiring through every sub-VI to connect data from the top to the bottom, or from the bottom back up. Nice refactoring tool. Well, the way I'm able to remember which terminal it is that you popped up on is I've got a global that I can just remember, oh, you did start wire drill here. We also see that with the right-click to show all the tags that were during the build. That's a global VI that just pops up on the screen. Global VIs can persist data between the builder VI and the execute. And that's using the lookup shortcut menu tags VI. Siemens, you actually called it Siemens root trick.
Put together the slides you got.
All
And
right.
you'd know what it meant if I put that.
So, we want this is case that crops up. You want a right-click menu that's going to affect the terminal of tunnels, but you only want it to be on while loops. So you register as your affected type. I want to register on tunnel or terminal of tunnel, and that means you're getting it on everything. And so in your builder VI, you then have to write a whole bunch of code to say, well, get my owner's owner, check the, try to do it 2 more specific, figure out what structure node it is. It's a mess. The trick is, instead of just registering for that, register for both terminal and the specific structure type. So that's going to give you 2 arrays out, and then you just check if the second array is empty. Because that means LabVIEW behind the scenes has done all of the type checking for you and eliminated the need for all of that code. And I can do the type checking a lot faster in the C++ code than we can in the G code, because I don't have to worry about parallelism because I know I'm in a limited thread. The G code always has to worry, is there somebody else who might be checking things, and so it does a lot more thread safety. It's a minor performance hit, but if you're checking, lots of terminals and stuff, it can actually build up. Really the biggest advantage though is that it just saves you writing a ton of code. So you just check that the structure rectum is not empty. That means you definitely clicked on a terminal of this type. Real simple. If your pop-up menu item launches a dialog, please end the menu item with ... I don't know if you've ever noticed that convention in LabVIEW, but any of our menu items that is going to bring up a separate dialog has an ellipsis at the end. That's the hint to the users that this has got more stuff coming. It's a nice thing that helps people expect the right behavior. So please make sure you do that if you're going to bring up secondary dialogues. Because anything without that should just do whatever it does. All right. How much time do we have left? We're supposed 9 minutes. Oh, that's enough time. All right. So first of all, just a refresher on this thing. And then second, remember I told you that Jeff got kind of excited? There's a feature in LabVIEW 2015. We're not talking. Yes, I did. That we are not going to market, we're not going to discuss, and I'm going to mention very briefly here. So I'm going to go into, this is the LabVIEW data one, isn't it? That's the correct data, good. So I'm going to go into resource, channels.
So this isn't on our...
This is not on anything. Yeah. Was it there? No. There it is. All right. So you launch this little install channel pop-up menus VI. You hit run, and it's going to copy a bunch of plugins in and run the refresh menus. And then you close it, and you don't care what that thing did. What you care about is what happened next. So I come over here, and let's see if I can actually while loop. So I drop a 1 while loop, and I drop another while loop. I don't know why I didn't just copy that. And I'm going to create a control. Now, I would like to stop these 2 loops at the same time. So my options are, I have a local variable. I can create a queue and send the queue into both places. I can do a whole lot of stuff. We've had hour-long debates, days-long debates, year-long debates on stopping 2 while loops. What I can also do is I can right-click here, and I can come into the Create menu, and I can say Create Channel Writer, and I can pick Tag. And this does a whole bundle of scripting in the background, and it gives me this little tag thing, which is interesting. And I can take that wire, and I can bring it over here, and then I can say Create Channel Reader, tag, wire that up, and I'm going to clean up this wire here. You see it. You'll note this wire, there's no tunnels. They don't exist. That's because this isn't a normal wire. This is an asynchronous wire, but what we're now calling channel wires. It leaps over the wall, crawls across enemy territory, jumps into the next diagram, and brings the data across. And it does so in a completely asynchronous fashion. It doesn't create a data flow dependency between these 2 loops. These are still parallel while loops. This, because it's a tag, is as good as a local variable. If you notice, there were some other types in there. There were ones that behave like buffered queues. There were ones that behave like any number of different things. There's a four-wire handshake protocol for those of you who do FPGA. This does not exist. Any of you who talk about this outside of here will be completely denied unless you find the not really secret forum on the community website where we talk about the channel wires. We're not really publicizing this. In fact, this and one other small forum is the only place we're going to talk about it is at NIWeek. It's not necessarily a finished feature, but it's finished enough that if you were to actually use it in your production code, we feel that we would be able to support it and continue the development of it. And we're kind of throwing this out there to see if you guys, play with it. Let us know what you can do with it and how it works. The trick about it is that none of it really worked until Jeff could build plug-in pop-up menus like you just saw, which allowed him to augment the editor environment. Because he was getting really frustrated. He built all this beautiful architecture for connecting loops and all this, and then the UI was just frustrating C++ code. And suddenly he could write all that in G, and he was much happier. So you might play with these. There's some weirdnesses. We admit it because it's not finished out. But when they work really well, and you can give us some feedback on whether this is a good direction for LabVIEW to go in general. So that's all I'm going to really say about that. But it was a nice little way to show that we were able to use this to even build up a whole new feature of LabVIEW itself. So that's the kind of power we're putting in your hand to augment the editor.
Could you possibly not show us where that comes from again?
If I were to come in here and open this VI, new file, save as, you would not see this path. Which leads, it's in the resource, channel pop-up menu items, install channel pop-up menu items VI.
If you were to send this to the
Not all of it, that's fine.
He's making it bigger, because he knows how to do that sort of thing.
And let it persist long.
So, like I say, this is one of those we're experimenting with, we're playing around with it, and who knows, we might have it in 2016. We might get enough feedback that this is a terrible idea and just creates confusion on the block diagram. We don't know.
Now, since this doesn't exist, do you have some kind of right-click pop-up that will deallocate the memory for all of us?
No, I'm counting on you having read the end-user license agreement that says you agree to forget anything I tell you to. You might not remember reading that section. Right. Yes. I wanted to put it under the tools menu. There was pushback that the tools menu is already loaded with a lot of stuff, and that very few people would necessarily need this, and so it didn't make sense to put it in as a general tool. If you would like to put that up on the ID exchange, that it should move into the tools menu, then we can certainly consider doing that. But it was the sort of thing where there were arguments about doing that, and I didn't feel like pushing on it. I would have added it to the tools menu myself. Yeah.
But now we can put it there ourselves.
Well, you could, yeah.
Are they single readers or can you fork them?
I can't hear.
Are the channels single reader? Can you fork them?
Some of them are forked, some of them are not. The actual definition of the individual channels affects whether or not it will allow its own wire to be forked.
Second question, are they transferring by value or reference?
They are asynchronously by value. Does that make sense? They are in the same way that a queue is a point-to-point queue is by value, that it transfers data out of this place and over here. So there's never multiple processes that have their hands on it at the same time. These are operating in much the same way, with the code behind the scenes handling the transmission.
Is it possible to transfer to the sub-VI?
Yeah. You can do create sub VI on that, and yeah, that's why the wires are nice. So you can actually follow the transmission, because with a global VI, you can't necessarily figure it out. With the queues, you have to go upstream and then back downstream. So we think we've got a visualization that will make reading some of that parallel data transfer code a lot easier. And we have aspirations of making it go cross-target, but at the moment they're only intra-process. But eventually we hope to fix that little bug.
All right, we're out of time, you guys. Thanks a lot for everything.
Yeah.